Well, I'll tell you what, for the sake of time, I'll begin and hopefully we can fix the slideshow and get it on in a little bit. I'm a little flustered coming in. I just came from Bratislava, but it's really a pleasure to be in Budapest. I actually have Hungarian roots. My mother is from Dunajska Streda, which is the Hungarian part of Slovakia, so I always love to be in Hungary. Last year I was supposed to speak at this event where it was being held in Romania, but I was actually ill. And I sent in my speech and David Fieldsen read it, and I heard he had a standing ovation. And from then I decided that I really do have to learn a British accent if I'm going to be successful with my speeches. Well, the topic I have today is defending human rights, and in the context of the Hungarian constitution in particular. And for me, the key rights in my field of practice, I do religious liberties law, would be the rights of the family and the right to life from conception until natural death. So those are the two topics I'm going to address today. The majority of my talk will be on the family issue, because I really do believe that that is the crowning issue of the day, and it really gets into every single aspect of our lives, whether we know it or not. We're really letting it get there, and if we don't stop it, we might not recognize our culture within a decade or two. Now, for 2,400 years, we've had a definition of marriage. It's called conjugal marriage, and it has three elements to it. It has permanence. There we go, very good. So we have permanence, meaning when you stand up in the altar and say, "To death till we part," you mean it. That it is a bond brought together by God, two flesh become one. Once you're married, you stay married. The second element is exclusive, meaning that husband and wife are monogamous, they stay together. And finally, it is family-centered. So that is the definition of marriage. It's not a Christian definition. It's not a Jewish definition. It's a natural definition. Conjugal marriage belongs in nature. Now, Christianity and Judaism recognize it because it is an institution that God has brought to us, but it is a natural good and a natural institution, one which many philosophers have spoken of, including Xenophanes, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Plutarch, for example. So 2,400 years. Even in homoerotic societies, they spoke of conjugal marriage, and they separated also from intimate friendship. Now, we've come to a point in the world where we're seeking to redefine this 2,400-year-old tradition. Now, how are we doing that? We are now not using permanence, exclusivity, and most importantly, we're no longer using a family-centered definition. I call it the revisionist view. Now, the revisionist view is a view that's based on a loving emotional bond, one distinguished by its intensity, a bond that needn't point beyond its partners. Partners seek emotional fulfillment as long as they can get it. So, based on that, no-fault divorce laws were brought into Europe and into North America a number of years ago. And marriage became the easiest contract in the world to break as a result of that. That was the beginning. Now, it's just biological fact that men are different than women. Men don't like that exclusivity as much as women. They don't seek that permanence as much as women. And so when no-fault divorce came in, it was really the children and wives who suffered as a result. This revisionist view really focuses on that. It says if you love another person, you're really allowed to leave your family and start a new family. And so it's no longer about the children. It's about the individuals in the marriage and their happiness. And the problem with that is on day 5,000 of your marriage, it's going to be qualitatively worse than on day 1 of your marriage, because those emotions don't exist anymore. They've changed into something deeper and more fulfilling, but that excitement you have on day 1 isn't there anymore. If it was, it wouldn't be a great thing. If you could imagine being in love for 5,000 days, not eating, not sleeping, it's just not, you'd have a heart attack by the second year of marriage. It's just not a reality. The end game of this revision is same-sex marriage. And what same-sex marriage brings into the culture is a lot of danger. And I'll enumerate for you a number of reasons why that's so. There are 6 areas affected by the redefinition of marriage. Number 1 is real marital fulfillment. Because if we redefine marriage, if it's no longer permanent, exclusive, and most importantly, if it's no longer family-centered, then how are we to realize the social goods that come from marriage? How are fathers supposed to be good fathers if they don't know what it means to be a good father? How are husbands and wives supposed to enjoy each other in a way that focuses on fidelity, trust, seriousness, if that's not the center of the marriage anymore? So that is a big, big issue. Now, the state has an interest in regulating marriage. If you think of traffic laws, no one likes traffic laws. I like to speed a little bit, so I certainly don't like traffic laws. But as annoying as they are, without traffic laws, private individuals wouldn't be able to regulate how they drive. People would be crashing into each other all the time. They wouldn't be stopping at stop signs. And so there's a government interest in maintaining safety on the roads. Similarly with marriage, now there are a lot of relationships. Government doesn't regulate friendship. That's obvious, even though that's an intimate relationship. It does regulate business partnerships because that has a knockoff effect on economics and on government interest. So why is marriage separate from these entities? It's because children are the future of the economy, they're the future of the government, the future of the country, basically, and that's where you take the interest. There is no interest in regulating same-sex marriage because, by definition, there's no children. And the more you get away from this traditional view of marriage and this redefinition, the further you get down the road of economic troubles, and I'll get to that later, because once marriage breaks down, the state has to grow. It's just a natural consequence. You need more judges to decide custody. You need more child and welfare services workers to deal with custody and how children are being taken care of. More police officers because of the crime that results from children growing up in broken homes. And the job force won't be as strong because you have a citizenry growing up that's not growing up in intact families. So that's all problematic. Now, another issue legally is definition. As lawyers, we really focus on words because you can only legislate that which has a definition. Now, why would we define same-sex marriage as marriage? I mean, what sets it apart? And I'll give you an example. There is Joseph and Paul. They've lived together for a number of years. They love each other. They're the closest two individuals in the world. When Joseph is sick, he wants Paul to be able to come and visit him in the hospital and make decisions on his health, and even terminal decisions. When one of them dies, the other one wants to inherit the property. So why would we not let them be married? Now, if I told you that Joseph and Paul were not homosexual, but they were just friends, they were widowers who found a deep friendship and wanted to share those things, you would say, well then, of course it's not marriage. So what is the defining characteristic there? Are we now defining marriage based on whether people are having sex or not? I mean, it's a ridiculous definition if that's how we define marriage. And second, if we are saying marriage is all about who you love the most, your most intense emotional relationship, love is equal, it should be recognized by the government, that's fine. But then why not 2 women and 1 man, or 4 men and 1 woman? Because if love is equal, if that's your lifestyle, and you want the government to recognize it, what is the difference between that and having 2 men marry or 2 women marry? There is no definition to same-sex marriage. There is no end point. The term marriage then loses all of its meaning and all of the social goods that come with it, and it's lost forever. The second point is spousal well-being. The 3 elements I mentioned, the permanence, the exclusivity, and the family-oriented life, lead to a much higher level of marital satisfaction. It leads to fidelity, trust, and security of permanence, leading to an optimal, fulfilling marriage. If you don't have that, if marriage is based on feelings, that permanence, that sense of security is gone, and the fulfillment of that marriage is lowered. So even if we say, well, what's the problem with two men loving each other or two women loving each other and the government regulating that? Well, there's a huge consequence to other people who are married because, again, that ideal is broken down and it's lost. Now, why is procreation, the ability to consummate marriage, so important when defining marriage? Because in the vast majority of jurisdictions, that's how you define a marriage. It's the ability to consummate. If you look at the body in general, the biological reality of the body, you take different organs. You have, for example, the lungs, the trachea, the trachea, the various parts that go into breathing. Separated from the body and from each other, they're absolutely useless. Taken together, they become something. They become something quite miraculous. The sum of the parts is greater than the individual good. And every system in our body, whether it be digestive, respiratory, circulatory, have one single goal, and that is to keep us alive, to keep us in a survival state. There is one system biologically that we have that we cannot do alone, and that is the reproductive system. So when Scripture talks about two flesh becoming one, it's not talking about married couples now have to love the opera together, go to the gym together all the time. They don't become genetically equal. It means exactly this, that when two flesh become one in the process of coitus, the reproductive system is used, and it is the only system that goes towards the survival of the human race. So whereas all the other systems within the body go towards the survival of the individual, it is uniquely the one that can be shared only between man and woman that goes towards the human race. So biologically, it's quite a miraculous thing. Now, the public benefit of having a healthy marital culture is that we have healthy adults. Marriage is permanent, exclusive union, order to family life, tends to help spouses financially, emotionally, physically, and socially. Marriage promotes maturity, both among men and women, but more so among men. Men spend more time at work, less time at the bar, more time at religious gatherings, and less time at jail, believe it or not, and much more time with family, because this definition has family as its center. It doesn't have the individual and his needs as the center. The third element is child well-being. Now, the redefinition of marriage would destroy the notion that men and women bring different biological and psychological values to parenting. A father is unique in what he brings to parenting, as is a mother. Also, the social pressures involved of keeping a man at home are lessened as a result of this. Now, a number of years ago, in the United States, there was something called the Million Man March. I don't know if you remember it. It was, I think they got 1 million people out, African Americans, who wanted to march to Washington, D.C. to support fatherhood. Because the reality was that fathers in the African American community weren't doing their job and staying in the family, and as a result, the whole social structure for the African American community was falling apart. So they recognized it back then. Recently, just before the Olympics in England, I don't know if you remember turning on your TV sets and seeing London burning. If you looked at who was the one holding the torches and breaking the windows and stealing things, it was 15 and 16-year-old kids. A pure result of an unhealthy marriage culture and a lack of family-centeredness. So we're already well on down the road of having a marriage culture that is sick to the point of being dead. Same-sex marriage is the death knell for traditional marriage. And culture will get only worse and worse. Now, in 1960, this is a remarkable fact, 95% of African American children born into wedlock, or were born into wedlock, 95%. In 2013, only 25% of African American children are born with a mother and father. That's a reduction of almost 75% in just a matter of 40 years. So to say that this new definition of marriage is somehow helping society out, that equality is the end game, the reality is that the end game is the destruction of family culture altogether. Now, the leading indicator of whether an African American child is born into poverty or not is whether he has a mother and a father. Now, that's the American example. I give it to you because those are the studies that have been done, but it's equally true here in Europe as well. Now, studies that control for other factors, including poverty, genetics, suggest that children raised in intact homes, that's where the biological parents are together in a low-conflict relationship, do better in all major indices. That's educational achievement. They have higher literacy and graduation rates. Emotional health. Their rates of anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and suicide are much, much lower. Familial and sexual development. They have a strong sense of identity, timing and onset of puberty. I mean, even that, believe it or not, the biological onset of puberty is affected by whether you have a mother and a father. Rates of teen and out-of-wedlock pregnancy are greatly increased once you go to non-married families. Child and adult behavior is greatly affected. Rates of aggression, attention deficit disorder, which is a popular thing we hear about, kids playing video games all the time. They don't have the attention span that they used to. Well, part of it is the breakdown of the family. Delinquency and imprisonment are also affected. So that is when you compare mother and father, intact household, versus single motherhood, cohabitation, joint custody after divorce, and step parenting. Now, that doesn't include same-sex parenting, which I'll get into a little bit later. And that is not, this is social science. So there are exceptions to every rule. A single mother who's a single mother because a husband left her is a victim of a bad marriage culture. It doesn't make her a bad mother, and it doesn't mean that she will be one of these statistics. It just means that overall, this is the way that social science has proven the importance of having a mother and a father. And again, men and women typically have different strengths as parents. Both are unique and irreplaceable. Boys and girls tend to benefit from fathers and mothers in different ways. Recognizing same-sex civil marriage changes all that, because then you no longer have the importance of having a mother and a father, because you have two fathers or two mothers. And so that necessity of having an intact family is thrown apart. And the fact is, once you have same-sex marriage, you cannot get away from same-sex adoption. Because legally, if you are allowed to adopt only as a married couple, a same-sex married couple is equal to a married couple under that law as can be. And you cannot deny adoption under those circumstances. So that is an important factor as well. Now, social science has proved that divorced single-parent homes and cohabiting couples do far worse in raising their children. So even if we accept that there is no difference in same-sex and opposite-sex parenting, which we don't, and I'll get into the statistics on that in a bit, redefining marriage in this way would still hurt and undermine marital stability and still hurt children in those heterosexual families. Studies prove that girls are likelier to suffer sexual abuse and have children out of wedlock or as teenagers if they don't grow up with a father. Boys without fathers tend to have much higher rates of aggression, delinquency, and incarceration. Mommies do not make good daddies. Daddies do not make good mommies. Mothers and fathers have distinct roles and needs in the family. Now, there are a lot of studies out there. And you hear them reported by the mainstream media about how, and you even, believe it or not, hear them at the European Court of Human Rights in cases that are going on over the past few years, that suggests that there is no difference between same-sex parenting and parenting between a mother and a father. And I'm here to tell you that that is absolutely false. First of all, none of these social science studies that are put forward by the media and by the homosexual agenda aspire to the standards of qualitative research. They're not large enough, they're not random, and they're not representative samples, and they're not observed longitudinally. Several of the most publicly cited studies on same-sex parenting compare same-sex parenting outcomes only to single parenthood, step parenthood, and parenting arrangements already shown to be suboptimal. So they're not comparing same-sex parenting to intact families. So right there, that's a big lie. They're taking their best players and putting them against the suboptimal teams and saying, look, we're doing just as good. It's just not a reality. Now, a few test for more than one or two indicators, which is important, because those are also biased as towards those indicators by excluding the indicators where they suffer. Snowballing is used as a recruiting mechanism. This is where you take someone who comes from an upper middle class city, usually a white male who's relatively out in the gay community, and you use him, and then you ask him to include his friends in the study. So what you have is a completely unrepresentative sample, and you're putting those people, again, the top tier in that category, versus a national study of mother-father parenting, which means minorities, it means poor people, it means people in rural areas where traditionally the statistics are much lower because of other social factors. So again, it's not fair. Yet such favorably biased samples of same-sex parenting outcomes are often compared to these representative studies. So there's two reasons why. Now there is a great study by Mark Regnerus, professor at the University of Texas, who is the only one who has set out to do a large enough study, a nationally representative study on this, and he has showed that parenting between a mother and father is far outweighing same-sex parenting, particularly men-men parenting, in every single major indus. If you don't want to believe that study, there's two reasons to believe why we shouldn't, why same-sex parenting leaves children worse off than opposite-sex parenting. Number one, every other alternative to married biological parenting, divorced, single, unwed parenting, have proven consistently to be superior, have proven consistently the superiority of married biological parenting. That's number one. So why would we then suggest that same-sex parenting would be any different? It just isn't. It's suboptimal. And second, reliable studies show that mothers and fathers foster and their absences impede child development. So again, why would the absence of a mother and father in a relationship being replaced by two fathers or two mothers somehow replace an irreplaceable factor in that relationship? So it's just, the reality is it doesn't work. Religious liberty. This is a huge area. When you legalize same-sex marriage, or when you start saying that homosexual relationships are equal and they have to be protected, that they're a victim class, the repercussions to religious liberty are massive. Peter and Hazel Mary Bull, for example, bed and breakfast owners in the United Kingdom have been successfully sued simply for refusing to let a room in their private bed, in their private home, to a same-sex couple. Now, as Christians, they had a strict policy which stated their Christian faith in that policy, that because of their belief in traditional marriage, they would not let a single room in their private home to a non-married couple. That means heterosexual, it means homosexual. So there's absolutely no discrimination there. And when they denied a heterosexual couple who wasn't married a room, there was no issue. When they denied a homosexual couple, a same-sex couple, they were sued and they lost for discrimination. In another instance, a foster family was denied the right to foster children because they refused to teach their children the benefits of homosexual behavior. Now, the UK Equalities Commission, which is a body supported by tax money, came in on behalf of the foster agency and said this was a good decision because we don't want these children being infected by Christianity. That's unbelievable. They later retracted the statement, but it's on the record and it really can never be taken back. Most Catholic adoption agencies have also had to close. There's 12 adoption agencies with a Catholic ethos in the UK, some which have been open for more than 100 years, which have now either had to close completely, get out of the adoption business, or change their ethos to a secular organization in order to continue doing adoptions because they refuse to place children into same-sex parent situations. And this is even before same-sex marriage has been enacted in the United Kingdom. And finally, there was 2 cases at the European Court of Human Rights which have made a lot of news. The case of Lillian Lidelli, who's a marriage registrar. She was a registrar for 15 years in Islington County in London, Islington Council in London. There was 20 marriage registrars. She was a strong Christian, is a strong Christian still, heard that same-sex cohabitation was going to be allowed, partnership was going to be allowed, and she asked her supervisor if she could be scheduled around performing the ceremonies, solemnizing these relationships and registering them because of her strong Christian faith. She said, because of my belief, I cannot promote what I believe to be a sin. It really does violence to my conscience. Now, this would make a really de minimis part of her job, really almost nothing. So scheduling her around it would have been as easy as could be. Rather, she was let go. So again, there was no discrimination here. It was simply a request to be accommodated in her religious faith. And for that, she was pushed out of her job after 15 years. In the case of Gary McFarlane, a Christian counselor, who, again, had a strong belief in traditional marriage, went into counseling because he wanted to help married couples with psychosexual therapy. So those couples who were having sexual difficulties in their relationship, he wanted to show them through the psychosexual analysis how to better that aspect. He went to his employer and said, again, I'm Christian. Is it possible not to have to do this therapy for same-sex couples? Because then I would be promoting homosexual behavior, and that would, again, be a huge sin. Now, counselors refer all the time. We know that. If your doctor or counselor is too busy, they'll refer you to another therapist. If there's a conflict of interest, you'll be referred to another therapist. If there's no competency on that specific field, you'll be referred to another therapist. So referrals happen every day. So all that was needed to be done was to tell Mr. McFarlane, refer the clients out to other therapists, and problem solved. Instead, simply for making this request, and again, remember there's no discrimination here because there was no actual client. So this is just a hypothetical that he asked. He was fired for gross misconduct. Now, gross misconduct in the UK setting means basically you've either beat up your boss or stolen all the money from the company. It's a blacklist, and he will never, ever be able to find employment in counseling again, simply for asking that question and trying to hold to his religious faith. The other aspect of this is hate speech. Now, we've seen that once you vilify a certain class, there is a great deal of hatred that goes towards people who hold views which oppose those groups. So, for example, slavery or racism. We know it's wrong. Publicly, we've accepted it. And so if someone is a racist, we don't let him talk. He gets in all sorts of trouble. He's hated by the general population. So when you accept now that same-sex marriage, and the problem here is being someone who practices homosexual behavior, same-sex marriage, anti-discrimination, it's all out there in the atmosphere, and they've not made any definitions. So even if you support traditional marriage and have no problem with homosexual behavior, you will still be called homophobic, simply for holding to traditional marriage. And, especially since the vast majority of Europe still holds those laws, including Hungary in its constitution, to be the law of the land, it is ridiculous that you can now be viewed as absolutely bigoted for believing in the law of the land and wanting to uphold it. I mean, it's shocking, in fact. Now, the left, coupled with unsavory characters such as the radical secularists, the homosexual agenda organizations, have managed to recreate witch hunts. If you hold the wrong opinion publicly, you could lose your job, be fined, and go to jail. There are street preachers in the UK who go to jail on a monthly basis for preaching out against homosexual behavior. At the European Union level, a number of years ago, the commissioner appointee for the justice position, Rocco Buttiglione, was asked about his beliefs in marriage and family, and he reported that as a Christian, he believed that it was better for mothers and fathers to be in the household, and that homosexual behavior was a sin. He said, none of this is a crime in the UK, none of this is part of my portfolio, so why are you even asking the question? And I mean, the media storm that ensued was ridiculous, and he had to step down simply for holding Christian beliefs. It happened even more recently, just this year, with the Maltese commissioner, who managed to make it through. Now, in the recent case of Vedland v. Sweden at the European Court of Human Rights, the court ruled that now, if you have a comment, and in the context of this case, it was related to homosexual behavior and criticizing homosexual behavior, and those comments are serious and prejudicial. They might be true, they might not be hateful, but as long as they're serious and prejudicial, you have committed hate speech. Now, the problem with this is that for decades, literally for decades, the court has held that freedom of religion allows you to shock, offend, and disturb. So, if, so I have to ask, who here in this room would be confident in placing certain expressions in the protected category on the basis that there is a fundamental right to use free speech in a way that is shocking, offensive, and disturbing? And who here in this room would still be comfortable placing other speech in the criminal category because it's serious and prejudicial? What's the difference between the protected, offensive, and shocking speech on the one hand and the criminal, serious, and prejudicial speech on the other hand? There is no difference. The answer is nobody knows, and those who shout the loudest get to make the rules. And the homosexual agenda, the radical secularists, those are the people who are shouting the loudest. And we're not shouting loud enough, nearly loud enough. Now, it's quite clear that the result of hate speech provisions is the reduction in the fundamental right to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Instead of being free to disagree and debate on issues like same-sex marriage, we're being shut up. We're being told that any of our comments are homophobic. People are being fired for putting on Facebook pages their belief in traditional marriage. This is a modern inquisition. We are being stopped from expressing ourselves freely. In a recent publication, the Fundamental Rights Agency of the European Union, of which I'm an elected member of their advisory panel, lamented that there is no currently adequate EU binding instrument aimed at effectively countering expressions of negative opinion. Now, is that really what we want? We want to stop all negative opinion. Now, how do we define negative opinion, by the way? Is criticizing Hungary and its constitution a negative opinion? I think not. Not in Brussels anyways. It makes you the most popular guy in the room. How about making fun of Christians, vilifying Christians? Is that a negative opinion? Absolutely not. They're the haters. They're the ones who are so homophobic. Yet, if we dare speak on our beliefs in marriage or on life, those are negative opinions. This is viewpoint discrimination in its purest form. Hate speech laws marginalize. They marginalize the average person. And the cure to bad speech is not stopping it, it's more speech, it's intelligent speech. And hate speech law has never, ever, ever worked. And the key example to this is the Weimar Republic. And most people don't know this, but it's a historical fact. The Weimar Republic had laws on anti-Semitic speech. And most of the people who became future leaders of the National Socialist Party were convicted under those laws. Now, did that stop the rise of Nazism? Absolutely not. In fact, it made heroes of those people. It empowered them and gave them a cause. Hate speech, shutting people up from speaking on basic issues, does just that. It does more harm than good. Now, the last issue on marriage I wanted to talk about was limited government. And this is a huge one. This is one we don't think a lot about. Again, when I said that when governments get interested in marriage and in defining marriage, it is their duty to get it right. And if they don't get it right, then there are serious consequences. In Scandinavia, there have been studies since the 1970s when same-sex marriage and homosexual behavior became more and more accepted. And their budgets have quadrupled since that time in expanded government. The Brookings Institute, which is actually a left-leaning institution, has said that from 1970 to 1996, $229 billion
US dollars in welfare expenditures have been used for teen pregnancy, poverty, crime, drug abuse, and health problems, all directly related to the breakdown of marriage. A state not promoting healthy marriage is like a doctor not promoting healthy eating and exercise. It's as simple as that. And when the state gets involved in the most intimate details, the more government expands, the more power it wants. So it then becomes protector of the orphan, of childcare cases, and then it gets into education. And I don't have time to discuss it today, but there are so many horrible cases going on in Sweden and Germany right now, precisely because of this mentality, that you'd be shocked. Governments are taking children away simply for being home educated, I'll tell you one case, because this is really the saddest case that I have. In Salzgitter, Germany, they have a mandatory sexual education program, 2 days of only sexual education for 9 and 10-year-old children, which includes an interactive sexual education play. All schools, whether they're private, Christian, public, have to do it. So we represented at my firm, ADF, 14 parents who wanted to opt their children out of these 2 days, saying this will harm our ability as parents to raise our children in a way that we want to provide them for teaching them sexual morality. So they did. They kept the kids out for the 2 days, and the result was that these families were fined 1,000 euros per parent. That's 2,000 euros per household. Now, there are a ton, literally a ton, of international human rights documents and case law that show that parents have the right to raise their children according to their faith and their religious beliefs, and that governments must respect that. Based on that, these parents refused to pay the fines. They refused to pay the fines for being good parents. The result was all 12 parents went to jail 40 days each, just for opting their kids out of 2 days of sexual education. This is where the world is heading when we accept a view that allows expanded government. And a lot of it comes from this unhealthy marriage culture. Now, I wanted to finish my topic on marriage just with a few slides, because I do believe that we've got two completely different pictures of what the homosexual agenda wants to look like and what it really looks like. And this is important. Now, the United Nations, you have to remember, the United Nations is based on national sovereignty. That it's supposed to respect governments and their ability to work on sensitive cultural issues by themselves. Still, the vast majority of countries in the world criminally forbid homosexual behavior. So this is the Secretary General calling the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered members of the human family, and saying that he is with them and he will do everything in his power to talk to world leaders to progress their rights. Now this, I don't know how many of you are familiar with American programming. The woman on the left is Ellen DeGeneres. She's probably the most famous celebrity in the United States relating to homosexual behavior. Her partner on the right is an actress as well. She was on the show Ally McBeal. I don't know if you remember that show, a lawyer's program. This is the face of the homosexual agenda. Two loving people. How could you hate that? How could you be against that? And I dare you, go online and try to find a picture of them where they're not happy. Because that's, the end game for them is every picture they have to be ecstatic because it's such a wonderful life to be homosexual. But, like everyone, they have bad days, they fight. You just don't see that because that's not the public image they want. This is what the world is being fed, that homosexual behavior is healthy, happy. This is the Gay Pride Parade. It happened just a few months ago in Prague. The American ambassador, as part of the new U.S. foreign policy, was out in front of this parade with the American flag, with a picture of John F. Kennedy and a picture of Barack Obama. And this is who he was leading. And this is who he was leading. Now that gentleman would be arrested in any other circumstance, but on this day, he was being led around by ambassadors. This statement is in Czech, so you don't understand it, but I will translate it briefly. This is from an NGO in the Czech Republic which specializes in pedophilia. And they are saying that this was a historic moment, this parade, because it was the first time in history that they got to march in the Pride Parade. So now you not only have ambassadors leading this guy around, but pedophiles as well. And this is the foreign policy, this is the human family that the Secretary General was talking about. I mean, it's a tragedy. And this is the greatest tragedy of them all. This is from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, which is the most credible medical outfit in the United States, perhaps the world, in detailing the prevalence of disease. Now, if you look at the bottom tiers, this is HIV/AIDS transmission through heterosexual contact, through injection drug needles, and through other modes. Very low. If you go way to the top of that list, male-to-male sexual contact. This is happening today. Homosexual behavior is causing AIDS at an epidemic rate even today. You never hear about it, but the statistics are there. The Food and Drug Administration, which is the body in the United States which governs a lot of things, medications, what foods are in the supermarket, etc., has completely banned anyone who's had any homosexual behavior their entire life from donating blood. And they've gotten a lot of trouble from it, being called homophobic and such, and so they decided that they were going to make a statement about it. And if you read that, I mean, it's an incredible statement. That men who have had sex with other men represent only 2% of the population. Yet, they represent 61% of all new cases of HIV/AIDS. So 2% of the population, 61% of all the new cases of HIV/AIDS, and 77% of the overall existing cases of HIV/AIDS. Now, what's most sad about this is that the most increased rate is among children, between 13 and 22. That's the most increased, 22% increase in that age cohort. This is the reality of the homosexual agenda and the homosexual lifestyle. The American Bar Association, which is the body that governs lawyers and the ability to practice law in the United States, which is very left, they're actually very pro same-sex marriage, have nonetheless put together some statistics. And this is one of them. 82% of the victims of domestic violence reported to the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs identified themselves as homosexual. 82% domestic violence. Another one says that same-sex cohabitants reported significantly more intimate partner violence than did opposite-sex partners. And this violence is rape, physical assault, stalking, so serious crimes. So what we know from the reality is, while we have a beautiful picture of Ellen and her partner, within the homes there is much more violence than with mothers or with regular men, women, opposite-sex couples. And the last one I wanted to show you, and this is a shocking one. Now, Scandinavia is in the EU, with the possible exception of Netherlands, the country that's had same-sex marriage longest, so they're the ones where we get the best statistics from. Now, a study on short-term same-sex marriage and registered partnerships in Norway and Sweden has found that divorce rates were 50 to 167% higher for same-sex couples than opposite-sex couples. Now, again, I said if you accept same-sex marriage, then you have to accept same-sex parenting. That's just what the law says. Now, the reality I just showed you is you have lifestyles which lead to HIV/AIDS, you have an incredible amount of violence in the household, and you have a divorce rate that is up to 162% higher than among opposite-sex couples. That's the reality of the homosexual agenda. So I applaud the new Constitution of Hungary. for its protection of the family and protection of marriage. Because without it, that is what you'll get. Without it, you will have riots like you're having in London. Or you'll have children growing up like the African American community where only 25% know their mothers and fathers. Now, this European Court of Human Rights has been very clear. There is no international right to same-sex marriage. It's not in the European Convention of Human Rights. That's Schalkenkopf v. Austria. In Gaston-Dubois v. France, they reiterated that and said that there is no right to same-sex parenting. So Hungary is absolutely 100% within its right to protect marriage. And from where I'm standing, it's the only way to have a bright future for this country, while all the other countries will suffer from not promoting marriage. And my time is up. I had also wanted to talk about abortion and the pro-life cases. Again, I'll just say with 2 minutes on that to close. Every human life is worthy of human dignity, and it's worthy of the right to life from the moment of conception until natural death. The European Court of Human Rights has held that there is no right to abortion in the European Convention of Human Rights. The Court of Justice of the European Union, the EU Court, has gone even further. They have defined life as beginning from the moment of conception. The only court, the only intergovernmental court in the entire world ever to rule on the issue has stated that it begins from conception. So the criticism of Hungary for daring to promote the life of the unborn child in their constitution is audacious. And it makes me ashamed for Brussels, because it's not the law, and it's not the reality. And holding these traditional values, protecting the natural family and the future children, will be the key to this country. And to be honest, and this will be my closing statement, when I started this talk, I mentioned that I'm half Hungarian, and I'm proud to be it. I'm proud to be in this country that has stood up to Brussels and has stood up to so many other countries and the United Nations to defend the people, the unborn children, and the families of this country. So God bless you for it. Thank you.
Mr. Roger Kiska, Alliance Defending Freedom, we are very happy accepted our invitation. The first question, can you tell me about Alliance Defending Freedom, please?
Absolutely. We're an organization dedicated to litigation and legislative matters in the area of religious freedom. So that's the right to life from conception until natural death, things like church registration, rights of conscience. So if doctors and nurses don't want to perform abortions because of their Christian faith, for example, we would defend them. And the family. So we protect the traditional definition of marriage and the natural family and parental rights as well. We have over 40 full-time lawyers in offices around the world.
Which Christian values have been represented in your thinking?
We discuss all Christian values. We believe that faith is the one human right which involves the transcendent, man's relationship with God. But it also involves corporate worship and the ability of people of faith to get together and to live out their faith in the real world, which means being able to be opposed to homosexual behavior, same-sex marriage, and to abortion as well. So we defend all of these values. We believe in parental rights, that parents are the best suited to raising their own children, not the state. We are very pro-life. We believe in the dignity of the unborn child as well as the dignity of the individual until natural death. And we believe in the family.